Today's shiur begins at the Mishnah that you'll find at the lower part of Daf Mem Dalet. Before we begin the Mishnah, you will notice in the Mishnah itself there's quite a bit of numbering, and on the side under the Nosei Mivneh heading we feature numbers 1 through 3 that you see in diamonds. Gimel Efshorios, 3 possibilities, Binyan Naro Hamurasa, regarding a Nara, a girl who is between the ages of 12 and 12 and a half, that's Murasa, that is married, that entered the first stage of marriage. And of course we're talking about a case that she had been raped. Shelo noheg bekulon dineha, that in each one of in these examples you'll see that the standard halachas that apply to the case of Nara Murasa as the Torah envisions things won't apply in each one in all of these cases. And what are the dinim we're referring to? You have shel skila. There's the need for was capital punishment, which is stoning. And if you have a situation of a Nara Murasa concerning whom the husband cast aspersions about her fidelity, we call that motzi shemra. That involves me'al kesef. If he turns out to be lying about her, claiming that she had been with another man and it turned out not so, he has to pay me'al kesef, 100 pieces of silver. Im hotziu oleo shemra. So this is just by way of introduction, just to familiarize ourselves with the halachas that we'll be exposed to. Now we turn to the Mishnah. Hagiyores shenizgaira bita ima. Have a mother and daughter that converted to Judaism. The zinsa, and the girl, after she became a nara, she entered marriage with a man, and she was mizaneh. That means, and she engaged in intimacy with someone else. Harei zu bechenek. She will be guilty of execution called chenek, strangulation, not stoning, which is we'll call it the standard approach to a nara hamurasa that is involved with forbidden intimacy. In this case, we're dealing with a girl who converted, and hence the penalty changes. The Rashi explains, Harezu bechenek, ve'afilu, we're reading Rashi, ve'afilu nisgaira pchusa mibas sholoshonim, the becheskas psuli, even if her conversion was under 3 years of age, where she would be considered a virgin, which is another one of the we'll call it the requirements of the Nara Hamurasa that behaves in a wayward fashion to be considered subject to skila. Not so over here. Now, the idea of converting under 3 years of age means that prior to 3 years of age, if she had any intimacy with, which was in her pre-converted state, the besulim would have grown back. The virginity would have reappeared within her anatomy. So she's considered a besula. Nevertheless, there's no skila, there's no stoning. The chiksiva skila, the Torah, when it writes about the skila form of execution, Benara Hamurasa b'Yisrael ksiva. It's speaking about a Nara Hamurasa that is of, let's say, of Jewish origin. The pasuk says Ki asa nevala b'Yisrael, and here you're dealing with a girl whose origin was not from within Israel, not within the Jewish people. Hence, the skila punishment is not imposed, rather chenek. Let's continue in the Mishnah. Ein lo pesach beis av v'lo mea sela. The pasuk that describes the execution of the girl the Nara Hamurasa that had forbidden intimacy. The pasuk describes her being taken to the entrance to her father's house. Not so over here. The pasuk in Dvorim Perek Chav Beis pasuk Chav Aleph says, "Votziu es hanara el Pesach beisovia uskolua anshe ira ba'avanim omesa." But here she doesn't have a father, because technically speaking, when and here we're speaking not in biological terms, we're talking in halachic terms. A person who converts to Judaism, anyone to whom they may have been related to before their conversion, upon conversion they're considered as if they are newborns. They are born anew, and hence they don't have any relatives from the past. In this case, she doesn't have a father. Likewise, there's no payment of me'ah. So if this girl who converted eventually marries, and the husband casts aspersions regarding her fidelity, and he turns out to be a liar, she will not collect the 100 pieces of silver. Once again, because the Torah that mandates these situations describes the women as having been B'Yisrael, whose origins were from within the Jewish people. Let's continue with a second example. Number 2. A woman who became impregnated before she converted. But while pregnant, she converted. And then, after her conversion, she bore a child. She bore a little girl. And the girl grows up, and she enters marriage. And as a Nara, she participates in forbidden intimacy with someone other than her husband. Harezu b'skila. She will be subject to the skila punishment. Parenthetically, the different forms of court execution are graded from, we'll say, from the more serious to the less serious. Skila, according to the opinion of the Chachamim, is the most serious form of execution. So, in a case like this, where though she was conceived while the mother was still not Jewish, the birth was after her mother converted. Now, the result of this is Harezu b'skila, as we said, v'ein lo pesach beisav lo me'asela. With regard to these points Beis and Gimel, it is like that which we saw above. The third case, her conception and birth was after her mother had converted. Kedusha means in holiness, but it means for our purposes that the mother had converted to Judaism before she conceived this child, before she conceived this girl. So a girl whose conception and birth was b'kedusha harei hi kabas Yisrael l'chol dvar. She's considered like a girl of the Jewish people, straightforward girl of the Jewish people, and all of the halachos would apply. There would be skila, it would be pesach beisavia, and if the husband turns out to be lying concerning her fidelity, she would collect, or payment of the 100 pieces of silver would be made. The slash mark indicates that the following is a new idea. Here we're talking about a Yisraelis, a regular Jewish girl that entered marriage, and there was a znus that took place. Yesh lo av v'ein lo pesach beisav. Imagine a girl has a father, but he's homeless. He doesn't have a house. Yesh lo pesach beisav v'ein lo av. Her father died, but he left a house. So there's a house with an entrance to it, but there's no father. Harezu beskila. Either way, the girl who became the nara that became an arusa, if she behaves in forbidden intimacy, she is subject to stoning. Lo nemar pesach beisavia elo lemitzvah. The pasuk reference to the stoning at the entrance to her father's house is simply the mitzvah, the preferable way of doing things, but it's not a binding factor. And hence, even in the absence of an entrance to her father's house, i.e., he doesn't have a house, or there is no father, that doesn't eliminate the skila form of execution. We turn to Amid Beis, the top line, Mino Hanimili. Rashi explains at the top, Mino Hanimili, from where do we know Shorosa Shalo B'Kedusha V'Leidosa B'Kedusha B'Skila, that in the event that the conception was prior to the mother's conversion, but the birth was after the mother converted, that warrants the skila form of execution. Omar Reish Lakish Omar Kra, there is an extra word that in the pasuk it says va mesa. This you can see in Perek Chof Beis in Dvorim pasuk Chof Aleph, where the pasuk reads Votziu es hanara el pesach beisavia uskalua an she'ira ba'avonim, and she stoned vomesa. Of course, if she stoned, she would die. Why does the pasuk spell that out, vomesa? So that's what we call an extra expression. Ki asa nevola b'Yisrael is nois beisavia v'yartera mikibecha. So the word vomesa appears as what they call kroya seira, an extra expression. L'rabbis, to include, we're continuing the Gemara on the second line from the top, the rabbis, to include hayrasa shelo b'kedusha v'leidosa b'kedusha, to include even that case as being subject to skila. Ihachi milka nami lilki umea sela nami l'shalem. Well, if vomesa is coming to marbe, the case of hayrasa shelo b'kedusha, so then why don't the other halachas fall into place as well? Namely, that if the husband lies about her, so then there will be malkos in this case, and there would be the payment of the 100 pieces of silver. Why not? Omar Kro v'mesa lemisa nisrabsa v'lo liknas. The example of hayrasa shelo b'kedusha v'leidosa b'kedusha is included, but only with regard to the form of execution, not with regard to the other halachas that we made reference to. So it's limited to the mesa. Mesa itself means death. So it's so that we're marba only with regard to skila, not with regard to the other aspects. Question, and you should note we have a mivneh, a note on the side. We have a nosei also, which we didn't read, but let's read it now. From the word v'mesa, we included a girl who was conceived prior to the mother's conversion, but the birth after the mother had converted. With regard to skila, the mivneh, the triangle that appears here, highlights the word v'ema, and these are hatzos nosofos shenarbe oisam mi v'mesa. Additional suggestions as to what we would marbe include through the word v'mesa. So our Gemara asks on the fifth line from the top, v'ema l'rabbis hayrasa v'leidosa b'kedusha. Maybe v'mesa comes to include a girl who was conceived and born all after the mother had converted. The Gemara says, I don't need a pasuk to be marba that. Ahi Yisraelis Malyasi, that's a full-fledged Jewish girl. Her mother conceived her after her mother was Jewish, so the girl herself is a Yisraelis Malyas, a complete Jewess. There's no need to have a special posuk to be marbe to include her. V'yema, why not say the rabbi seirosu leizosa shelo b'kedusha? Go the other way and include even someone whose conception and birth were prior to the mother's conversion. The Gemara says no, that we're not going to include vis-a-vis skila, because in came b'Yisrael my ahani lay. The pasuk made reference to b'Yisrael. Pasuk says ki asa nevola b'Yisrael, that she did something despicable b'Yisrael, and b'Yisrael indicates that the girl had some kind of, let's say, origin in the Jewish people. That cannot be said regarding a girl whose birth was prior to the mother's conversion. That girl had to have a separate conversion. So the Gemara is then telling us that the word B'Yisrael, what benefit would be B'Yisrael, which is as a limiting factor, be if I'm going to include even Hayrosa V'Leidosa Shelo B'Kedusha. As you can see, we have a slash mark indicating that which follows is a new idea. We also will see a diamond marking, and that's explained on the side under the Mivneh. Hamotzi Shemra al Hayisoma, and you'll have Hakatana. Those are featured with double underlines. Motzi Shemra, once again, is a case of a husband casting aspersions or suspicions concerning his wife's fidelity after he had already married her. If he turns out to be a liar, so he's called a motzi shemra, and as a motzi shemra, so there's a punishment of lashing, and there is a fine of 100 pieces of silver that have to be paid. Omar Rav Yossi Bar Chanina Hamotzi Shemra al Hayesoima Potter. One who is Motzi Shemra on an orphan girl, she doesn't have a father, and the husband nevertheless lied about her, he is exempt from the aforementioned punishments. Shenemar v'nosnu lavi hanara. The husband has to pay the father of the girl, of the nara. Prat lezu. This pasuk comes to exclude this case of the Yisoma she'ein lo av. She doesn't have a father. She's an orphan. She doesn't have a father. Mosiv Rav Yossi bar Oven v'tem Rav Yossi bar Zvida. So Rav Yossi raises an objection from a Tanaic source that opens with a pasuk from the case of seduction. It says v'im mo'ein yomein aviyah. If the father of the seduced girl doesn't want the seducer to marry his daughter, so the pasuk says the seducer then must pay money. L'rabois yisoima liknas. This includes the case of a yisoma, of an orphan girl, that if she were seduced, so a knas payment must be made. That's Divrei Rabbi Yosef Glili. Who moisiv law, and by the way, so what's the problem? We see that a yisoma, let's say a defilement, a forbidden intimacy with the yisoma does generate the need to pay. That is a problem for what Rabbi Yossi taught above in the diamond, with the double underlined al yisoma potter that we saw. Gemara continues, Hu moisiv law, vu mefarik law. Rav Yossi raised the question, he also answers. Bevo oleha v'achakach nisyasma. The source that says that the yisoma knas payment must be made is a case where the intimacy had taken place while the father was still alive, and then he died. Notice we have a number 2. Rava Omar Chayav. This is a throwback to the number 1, where Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina said that Motzi Shemra Yisoma is exempt. Rava says that Motzi Shemra on Yisoma is chayav. Mimai, from where does Rava know that? Vidutani Ami, from Ami's teaching. Besulas Yisrael. The Pasuk mentions that term, Besulas Yisrael, and we infer from that Velo Besulas Gerim. Now, a Giores, let us point out, a Giores is a woman, and we mentioned this earlier, that doesn't have a father. The Torah doesn't recognize any familial connection when you're dealing with a convert. Now, we pointed out that Rava said that a Motzi Shemra Yisoma has to pay the knas, and he knows it from this Tanaic source, a very brief source. I amris bishlama ki haygavno b'Yisrael mechayev. If you say that the parallel case of a Jewish girl, also who doesn't have a father, that's where the father died, she's called a Yesoma. So, in that sense, she's parallel to the Besulas Gerim. Both do not have fathers. One in legal terms and one in physical terms. So, if you say that the parallel case by a Jewish girl who's a Yesoma, Mechayev, there is an obligation to pay the knas. Hainu ditzrich kro lemuti gerim. Hence, I need the pasuk that says Besulis Yisrael to exclude gerim. Eloi amers b'Yisrael ki gav the potter. If you're going to say like Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina said before, that one who's motzi shemra on a Yisoma is exempt. Hashta b'Yisrael potter beger mibaya. If I tell you that for a girl who's born into a Jewish family, just technically speaking, has to be an orphan, that there's an exemption there, do I have to tell you about an exemption by gerim? That would be very obvious. So you don't need a pasuk to tell me that which is obvious. It must be, therefore, not like Rabbi Yossi taught, but rather like Rava. Omar Rish Lakish, Hamotzi Shemra al Haktana Potter. Shneimar, the pasuk says, V'nosnu la'avi hana'ara. The money for having lied about the girl is paid to the father of the na'ara. Na'ara molei diber hakosuf. The pasuk that describes the payment to the father of the nara, it spells out nara mole, means it's written in with a hay in it, and that indicates nara and not a katana. Maskif law, and note that this is a long question. Maskif law of Acho bar Abba. Taimu de Kosev bo hanara. The reason that or the basis from which you're reaching the conclusion of the Ptur by Motzi Shemra Ktana is because of the way the word is written. And if not for that, I would have thought that the Parsha of Motzi Shemra applies to a minor as well. But Hoksiv, it says in that section, it says, if it turns out that the husband is saying the truth, that she was with another man after their erison, Lo nimsu besulim lenara v'hotziu esanara el pesach beisavia skulua. The pasuk says that what the husband's claim turns out to be true, then she will be taken to her father's home and stoned. So who's being described in this parsha that we call the parsha of Motzi Shemra? Could it possibly be referring to a minor? It couldn't be referring to a minor. Uktano lav bas oinshinhi. She's not deserving of execution. She's a minor. So I don't need the word hana'ara, spelled with a hey at the end, to be the basis of excluding the Ketana. I know that Ketana is not the subject of this section, because this section of the Torah describes that if the husband is telling the truth, there's a death penalty, and a death penalty would never be given to a minor. So now, the question remains, what does the hana'ara word teach me? If it's spelled out with a hey at the end, what does that mean? What does it do for us? Elo kan na'ara. Rather, here in Motzi Shemra, because of the death penalty that is associated with this particular section, I realize that you're dealing with a non-minor, with a nara. And it just so happens that the word nara is spelled out with a hey here. From this point, we then can jump to the rest of the Torah. Kol mokum shenamar nara. However, in the rest of the Torah, where the word nara is not spelled with the hey, afilu ktana b'mashma, that will indicate to us that even a minor is included. Now, this point we've seen before in the Gemara, but here the Gemara repeats it, and that is that it's not that the hey is teaching me that the Parsha of Motzi Shemra is dealing with a Gedola, with a Nara. I know that from the Skila that's present. But at the same time, the word Nara in this Parsha, which deals with a non-minor, is spelled with the hey. Therefore, in all other cases where it's spelled without the hey, the Torah is including a Ketana in those other discussions, those other sections of the Torah.